When you take a look at how steel prices have ramped, I mean, last I checked, I think they're up about 50% since tariffs were announced. Where do we go from here? I'm curious, because, I mean, the whole point, right, of tariffs for the president is to try and reshore and aid and abet domestic U.S. manufacturing. But with prices up so high already, or so much already, the steel mills that are existing right now, wouldn't they be reluctant to add capacity and just sit back and enjoy the prices for now, at least?
Yeah, thanks for having us. I think definitely that's what's happening in the market right now, is that the steel mills are enjoying higher prices, as you pointed out, about 50% higher for benchmark hot rolled coil since the beginning of the year and since before the tariffs really came into play. So yes, why add capacity if doing so would take away from that 50% move in steel? However, what we saw last time around back in 2018, when the first Section 232 tariffs were put in place, is that the industry did see prices rise initially and then saw them retreat a bit, right? So it's really a function of the supply responding. Some of the imports that were not initially perceived to be still competitive after a 25% increase are now interesting again, right? Because the prices surpassed that 25%. So again, I think there's a lot of reason to believe that imports could get competitive again because the price has just exceeded everyone's expectations of that initial 25%. And in the case of steel, unlike aluminum, unlike copper, there actually is some spare capacity that could respond if the mills choose to. And there are already planned ramp-ups of additional new capacity coming to the market this year and next.
And I got to say, there's the price issue, right? There's also Trump policy. That is an issue, right? Because if you were a steel mill going, look, maybe I should add capacity here, but hold on, I'm not sure what the president's going to do. Tariffs tomorrow, right? I mean, obviously they're going up, but they could just as easily, let's say, if the president does the deal with XYZ country, they could come down.
Yeah, so there's the unintended consequence of affecting the demand, right? To the case that you just had on the show about the F-150 is now made out of aluminum as of, I guess, a decade ago. But aluminum prices are particularly going higher. So how does that affect demand for F-150s if the price tag has to spike? So I think the demand destruction angle is something to watch. I'm not sure if it's going to be dramatic or right away, but something that could be a concern down the road. And then the other angle that I think is fascinating is that these higher prices are incentivizing companies to build in the U.S. So instead of having to compete with foreign steel overseas, now you've got Hyundai Steel last week in the White House talking about building new capacity in North America. So the domestic mills are reluctant to add additional capacity because in a pen stroke, you could have those tariffs undone. So after Trump's administration, once you've spent billions of dollars to add new capacity, who knows how long it can last.
Yeah, Timna, how are you thinking about the U.S. Steel, Nippon Steel deal, if it is still alive at all?
Well, it's a lot of conjecture at this point. What we read is probably the same as everyone else in the public domain, but it does seem like there's been a bit of momentum in the positive direction. Some politicians speaking out about that were in favor of the deal, feeling like they're getting some progress. So that's all I can speak to. I just think that, if the Trump administration is encouraging more investment in the U.S. and Nippon just upped the amount that they would spend on U.S. steel and supporting steel making in the U.S., it's kind of adhering to what he's asking for, right? It's in line with Trump's, with his goals and with what Hyundai Steel has announced. Ultimately, if Nippon wanted to, they could build new capacity on their own without going through U.S. Steel. So one way or another, I feel like there'll be more capacity and more capacity from foreign producers by the end of the decade.
Do you think tariffs on copper are imminent, and how concerned should car makers be about that, or especially parts makers? Because, I mean, copper obviously goes into things including like hosing and piping, right?
Correct. Copper is a lot harder for me to fathom. I don't know what the motive is on copper. There is there is copper capacity. There are copper mines in the U.S. that could be expanded, but these definitely take multiple years. So I'm not sure there would be much additional copper, even if there were the incentive to do so in the short term by the time that Trump's administration is over. And what you pointed out was the COMEX. So you showed the spike in copper prices, but the LME copper price has been less. So ultimately, it's a zero-sum game. CME's gone up, the LME goes down. I don't think it's sustainable to see the U.S. outperform the rest of the world this much. But I think that ultimately the copper angle is a harder one for me to fathom. I don't think the U.S. is the most natural producer of copper. There are many, many low-cost mines around the world. We're seeing more out of the DRC, Latin America, obviously. But the U.S. does not have quite the same quality of copper. If you wanted to incentivize copper production, a great way to do that would be to reduce regulations on mining and help approve permitting more quickly. So there's a lot of other tactics that I would take, maybe more carrot than stick in this case.